that because I want to go forward to a gold standard. I want to just prevent the Federal Reserve from stealing from people and taxing people by doubling the money supply. It is cruel and unusual punishment to the economy to allow a secret organization like the Federal Reserve inflate the currency, deliberately destroy values, destroy the people who save.
So your theory is have the Congress authorize the auditing of the Federal Reserve so the politicians in Congress can influence and affect and help decide what the Federal Reserve does.
No, you're misinterpreting the bill. You should read it because the bill says that the Congress has nothing to say about it for 6 months.
Now you
then they
know,
can look out.
Ron,
wait a minute. Let me finish. Then they can look at it. But what you're arguing is the case for, say, the SEC finds out something about a bad company. And then they say, well, this covered up because it might hurt that company. When the Fed knows something about a bank, you want secrecy because you say, well, it might hurt the company or the bank if people know that's in trouble. So you want the Federal Reserve to cover up so that we don't know. They can spend money, hurt the taxpayers, destroy our currency, and give us a depression, and we're not allowed to know about it. There's no place in the Constitution that authorizes that kind of power.
Ron, I've been in Congress long enough, and so have you, and we've used the General Accounting Office to put pressure on federal agencies, both independent agencies and non-independent agencies.
Good.
And if we call for audits of an agency, that sends a message that here comes the Congress. We're going to take actions to curtail what you're doing. And that's what we're all worried about.
You're reading more into it because I wrote a prohibition into the bill for that. But besides, I mean, morally speaking, don't the people have a right to know what the Fed is doing, what kind of deals they make with foreign governments, foreign central banks, international financial organization, the private banks? We have a right to know. We have an obligation. We have a moral obligation. And besides, we're in this horrendous mess. It was the fault of the Federal Reserve. And to say, oh, the Fed is wonderful. Let them go. Let them create all the money. Put Bernanke back in. He had nothing to do with it. I mean, the American people are way ahead of you on this one. The American people have awakened. I'll tell you that.
I was at a hearing the other day when your side proposed that it wasn't the Federal Reserve. It was the GSE's government-sponsored enterprises that caused this thing. You got to pick a decision. Do you know what caused it? I don't. That's why I voted for the Commission to do the study.
The Federal Reserve causes the bubble, but you put kerosene on the fire by allocating credit and say you have to put money into a certain group. If the Fed creates money, we don't know where it's going to go, but because we say put it in the housing bubble occurred. Put it into medicine, medical prices go up. Put it into education, education prices go up.
Wait a second, you think the Fed is responsible for higher education costs and higher costs for health care?
Yes, the Fed does. No, because the value of the dollar goes down, and you don't know where the money's going to go. But if you have a free market in distributing cell phones and computers, the market overwhelms the inflation. Prices actually go down. But the money is out there, has to be put into something. Quality does not go up. And this is why the cost of medicine goes up without the quality going up. Education, everybody gets a college education, but the quality of education goes down. And it's the fact that when you allocate credit, and if you do it in housing, it just puts fuel on the fire of the bubble. But you cannot have a bubble without easy money and easy credit. And if 0% interest rates isn't easy money, what is?
You know, Ron, I just want to point out and just say stop. And I'm not going to argue that there aren't causes and effects out there that we should be studying and looking at and taking sometimes corrective action. And that's what we're attempting to do now as we do regulatory reform. As you well know, we spent the last year intensely studying what could be done to try and prevent and project what may happen in the future and what actions could be taken to prevent those actions to stop these crises. But let me say it isn't all bad. We had the creation of the SEC and the strong regulatory acts of the 1930s, and we prevented a financial crisis in this country for 75 years. Even though every 25 years...
There was a crisis in the 70s? No crisis in the 70s? I mean, ask Paul Volcker if he had a crisis.
No,
in the 70s.
we had inflation, and we were able to bring Volcker in and his policies and correct that inflation, and that's what the system should do.
So what do you call that? A minor correction, but not a crisis, huh?
Well, yeah, much different.
We
didn't have a total collapse this time. Maybe what we should have done is let that happen, and then all of you in the free market system would have been perfect. We would have wiped out for decades, and everybody would have been in a collapse situation. Then you'd be happy. What Volcker did this time was act with responsible leadership with the Secretary of Treasury and the President. Your Secretary of President, a Republican, not a Democrat, and they did a pretty good job of rescue. But all of you fellas want to label this as having been a failure because you really don't want to see it succeed. I think you have a negative attitude toward the American economy.
If regulations are so good, and I know we're piling on the market for regulations, the SEC would have prevented this crisis. The SEC would have prevented the Enron scandal. Sarbanes-Oxley would have prevented. Every time you put on regulations, you chase our businesses overseas. That's why the businesses are leaving, and you're going to do a lot more of that because the burden will be so great, and that's why we're not having a good recovery.
Well, then we just should.
Because they see taxes coming down and regulations coming down.
According to your theory, Ron, we should allow then a business to go uninterrupted, do anything at any time with anything because they can't possibly make mistakes.
Paul. Come on, no, you allow them to go bankrupt. You don't bail them out. Yes, we would allow General Motors to do what they want when they screw up and they go bankrupt. Let them go bankrupt. You don't take good people's money and bail them out. You don't bail out bad.
Do you accept the proposition that if we hadn't gone into the rescue program a year ago, almost every large bank in the United States and in the world would have collapsed within 72 hours?
No. Some would. Some would, but we'd be over it by now. In 1921, Paul, that's exactly what we did. We still didn't accept all your Keynesian economics. In 1921, the recession, depression, it was severe after the inflation of World War I. They had hands off, and it was over in a year. That's what always happened before. When they inflated, they caused a bubble. There was a correction. But in the 1930s, Hoover was the culprit, and Roosevelt followed up, and they prolonged the agony for 15 years. That depression didn't end until after World War II, believe me. People weren't doing well until after then. So, yes, you want hands off, but you want to enforce the laws against fraud and enforce the law of bankruptcy. That's a federal regulation. But what we do is we don't allow the bankruptcy. We take the good people's money and bail out the bad investments, prop up all the mistakes, and that is what you're doing. You're just pouring out the money, hoping to patch up the hole in the bubble. Hey, it's not going to work, and believe me, I'm not happy about it, no matter what you say.
Congressman Paul, we want to thank you very much for your time. We appreciate your joining us today.